Mother and son vanished from mountain cabin in 2011. New witness came forward in 2024. The winding mountain road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, each curve revealing another layer of pristine snow that had settled like a thick blanket over the Colorado Rockies. March 2011 had been unusually harsh, and even as spring whispered its arrival in the valleys below, winter maintained its iron grip on the remote peaks surrounding Pine Ridge County. Sarah Mitchell pressed her foot gently on the brake pedal as her rental car navigated another sharp turn. In the passenger seat, her 9-year-old son Tommy was absorbed in his handheld gaming device, the soft electronic sounds mixing with the steady hum of the car's heater. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, noting how his dark hair fell across his forehead, so much like his father's had when they first met all those years ago. "Are we almost there, Mom?" Tommy asked without looking up from his game, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when they're simultaneously excited and slightly apprehensive about something new. "Just a few more miles, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her own voice betraying a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil that no parent should have to endure. But it was over now. The judge had made his final ruling just 3 weeks ago, and Tommy was officially, permanently hers. The custody battle with her ex-husband David had been nothing short of devastating. What had started as a relatively amicable divorce had spiraled into something ugly and consuming, filled with accusations, counter-accusations, and a legal system that seemed designed to tear families apart rather than heal them. David had questioned her stability, her parenting abilities, even her mental health. His lawyer had painted her as an unfit mother, someone who couldn't provide the stable environment Tommy needed. But she had fought back. Oh, how she had fought. Every fiber of her being had screamed against the injustice of it all. She had provided documentation, character witnesses, and evidence of her devotion to Tommy. She had endured psychological evaluations, home visits, and countless hours of testimony that laid bare the most intimate details of their family life. The final hearing had been particularly brutal. David's attorney had pressed her about her work schedule, her single status, her ability to provide for Tommy without the support of a traditional 2-parent household. Sarah had sat in that courtroom, her hands folded in her lap, fighting back. Tears as strangers dissected her life and questioned her worth as a mother. But in the end, the truth had prevailed. The judge had seen through David's manipulation, had recognized the genuine love and stability she provided for Tommy. The custody order was clear and final. Tommy would remain with his mother, with David receiving supervised visitation rights. Only now, as they drove through the mountainous terrain toward their weekend retreat, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The cabin she had booked through a rental service promised solitude, tranquility, and the chance for both of them to heal from the trauma of the past year. "Look, Tommy," she said, pointing toward a break in the trees where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow. "Isn't it beautiful up here? So quiet and peaceful." Tommy finally looked up from his game, his eyes widening as he took in the magnificent scenery. "It's really pretty, Mom. But it's kind of scary too, isn't it? Being so far away from everything." Sarah understood his apprehension. The isolation that had drawn her to this location might feel overwhelming to a 9-year-old, accustomed to the familiar sounds and rhythms of suburban life. "Sometimes being far away from everything is exactly what we need," she said gently. "Sometimes we need to step back and just breathe." The GPS system indicated they were less than 2 miles from their destination now. The road had become narrower, more winding, and Sarah couldn't help but notice that they hadn't seen another vehicle in over 30 minutes. The remoteness was both exhilarating and slightly unnerving. Her phone had lost signal about 10 miles back, and she had to admit that the complete disconnection from the outside world felt both liberating and isolating. For months, her phone had been a constant source of stress. Calls from lawyers, text messages from David, emails from the court system. Now, in this snow-covered wilderness, all of that felt like it belonged to another world, another life. "There it is," she said, as the cabin came into view through the trees. It was exactly as advertised, a rustic log structure with a stone chimney, surrounded by towering pines and situated in a natural clearing that offered stunning views of the surrounding mountains. Smoke was already curling from the chimney, which meant the caretaker had prepared the space for their arrival as promised. They pulled into the small parking area beside the cabin, and Sarah turned off the engine. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming after hours of driving. No traffic, no urban noise, no human sounds at all, except for their own breathing and the soft settling of the car as the engine cooled. "This is really it?" Tommy asked, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, as if the magnificent silence demanded reverence. "This is really it," Sarah confirmed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Our home for the next 3 days. Just you and me, buddy." They gathered their bags from the trunk and approached the cabin. The key was exactly where the rental company had said it would be, hidden beneath a decorative rock near the front door. Sarah turned the key in the lock and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The interior was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace and rustic furniture that spoke of comfort and relaxation. The living room was spacious, with large windows that offered panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness. A fully equipped kitchen adjoined the living area, and Sarah could see a hallway leading to what she assumed were the bedrooms. "This is awesome," Tommy exclaimed, his earlier apprehension forgotten as he explored the space. "Look, Mom, there's a loft up there. Can I sleep in the loft?" "We'll see," Sarah replied, though she was already mentally planning to let him have his adventure. After everything they'd been through, Tommy deserved to feel the joy of childhood again. As they unpacked their belongings, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The custody battle had been more than just a legal proceeding. It had been a test of her strength, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to her son. There had been moments when she had questioned whether she had the energy to continue fighting, whether the emotional toll was too great. She remembered one particularly difficult night, about 4 months into the legal proceedings, when she had sat in her kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a stack of legal documents and wondering if she was strong enough to see this through. Tommy had been staying with David that week, and the house had felt empty and lifeless without his presence. She had called her sister Jennifer, sobbing into the phone about how the system seemed stacked against her, how David's resources and connections gave him advantages she couldn't match. "You're his mother," Jennifer had said simply. "That means something. That means everything." Those words had sustained her through the darkest moments of the legal battle. Being Tommy's mother wasn't just a biological fact. It was a calling, a responsibility, a love so profound that it had given her the strength to fight against overwhelming odds. Now, as she watched Tommy explore their temporary home with enthusiasm, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her own perseverance. She had fought for this moment, for the right to be here with her son, for the opportunity to rebuild their life together without the constant threat of separation. "Mom, come look at this," Tommy called from the kitchen. "There's a note here, from the owner." Sarah joined him at the kitchen counter, where a handwritten note was propped against a basket of welcome items. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Retreat," she read aloud. "We hope you find the peace and tranquility you're seeking. The firewood is stocked, and you'll find basic supplies in the pantry. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to contact us. Though please note that cell service is limited in this Area, the landline phone is available for emergencies. Enjoy your stay. The note was signed simply the management, but Sarah appreciated the thoughtful touch. The basket contained local honey, homemade jam, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine. Small gestures that made the space feel welcoming and carefully tended. "Can we make s'mores tonight?" Tommy asked, having discovered a package of marshmallows. "In the welcome basket." "Absolutely," Sarah replied, ruffling his hair. "But first, let's get settled in and figure out what we want to do for dinner." As the afternoon wore on, they established their routine in the cabin. Tommy claimed the loft as his sleeping space, and Sarah helped him arrange his belongings in the cozy area under the eaves. She chose the master bedroom, which featured a comfortable bed and another set of large windows overlooking the forest. The isolation that had initially felt slightly overwhelming was beginning to feel therapeutic. Without the constant interruptions of modern life, Sarah found herself truly present in a way she hadn't been in months. She watched Tommy play, listened to his stories, and felt the tight knot of stress in her chest beginning to loosen. They prepared a simple dinner together, working side by side in the well-appointed kitchen. Tommy chatted about school, his friends, and his plans for the summer, and Sarah realized how much of his voice she had missed during the intense period of legal proceedings. The custody battle had consumed so much of her energy that she had sometimes felt like she was going through the motions of motherhood rather than truly living it. "I'm glad we came here, Mom," Tommy said as they sat down to eat. "It feels like we're explorers or something." "We are explorers," Sarah agreed. "We're exploring what it means to be a family again, just the two of us." After dinner, they built up the fire and settled onto the comfortable couch to read together. Sarah had brought several books, and Tommy had his collection of adventure stories. As they read, the only sounds were the crackling fire, the occasional settling of the cabin, and the distant whisper of wind through the pine trees. "Mom," Tommy said during a quiet moment, "are you happier now?" The question caught her off guard with its directness and emotional intelligence. At 9 years old, Tommy was already perceptive enough to recognize the stress and pain she had been carrying. "I'm getting happier every day," she said honestly. "Sometimes it takes time to heal from difficult things, but being here with you, knowing that we're going to be okay, yes, I'm much happier now." "I was scared we might not get to stay together," Tommy admitted, his voice small and vulnerable. Sarah's heart ached for the burden her young son had carried during the custody proceedings. She had tried to shield him from the worst of it, but children are remarkably perceptive, and Tommy had undoubtedly sensed the tension and uncertainty that had dominated their lives. "You never have to be scared of that again," she said firmly, pulling him closer. "The judge made his decision, and it's final. We're going to be together, always." As the evening progressed, they did indeed make s'mores by the fire, laughing as marshmallows caught flame and chocolate melted onto their fingers. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like they were simply a mother and son enjoying each other's company, without the weight of legal battles or uncertain futures hanging over them. When it came time for bed, Tommy was reluctant to leave. The warmth of the fire and the comfort of their shared space. Sarah understood his hesitation. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't intrude. "Tomorrow we can explore the area around the cabin," she promised, as she helped him get ready for bed. "Maybe we'll find a good spot for a snowman. And maybe we'll see some wildlife," Tommy added hopefully. "Maybe we will," Sarah agreed, though she privately hoped any wildlife encounters would be limited to harmless creatures like rabbits or squirrels. As she tucked Tommy into his loft bed, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for winning the custody battle, but for having the wisdom to seek out this peaceful retreat where they could begin to heal. The cabin represented more than just a vacation rental. It was a symbol of their new beginning, a place where they could rediscover the simple joy of being together. Later, as she sat by the dying fire with a cup of tea, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The custody battle had been one of the most challenging experiences of her life, but it had also revealed her own strength and resilience. She had fought for Tommy not just because he was her son, but because she knew in her heart that she was the parent who could give him the love, stability, and guidance he needed. The fire crackled softly, and Sarah found herself feeling grateful for the silence that surrounded them. No lawyers calling with updates, no court dates to prepare for, no ex-husband's demands to consider. Just the peaceful sounds of the mountain wilderness and the comforting presence of her son, sleeping safely in the loft above. As she prepared for bed, Sarah looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape illuminated by moonlight. The beauty was breathtaking, and she felt a sense of hope for the future that had been missing from her life for far too long. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new opportunities to reconnect with Tommy, and new chapters in the story of their life together. She climbed into bed feeling more relaxed than she had in months, listening to the gentle sounds of the wilderness outside and the soft breathing of her son above. This was what peace felt like, she realized. This was what it meant to be home. Sarah woke to the sound of absolute silence, a quietness so profound it seemed to have weight and substance. The digital clock on the nightstand read 7:23 a.m., and pale morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the rustic bedroom. She lay still for a moment, savoring the unfamiliar sensation of waking without anxiety, without the immediate mental checklist of legal obligations and custody concerns that had dominated her mornings for months. "Tommy," she called softly toward the loft. "Are you awake, sweetheart?" No response. Sarah smiled, imagining her son still wrapped in the deep sleep of childhood, cocooned in the warmth of his sleeping bag under the cabin's slanted roof. She decided to let him sleep a bit longer while she prepared breakfast and enjoyed the peaceful morning. The cabin felt different in the morning light, more welcoming, more like a real home rather than a rental property. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and Sarah quietly added fresh logs, coaxing the flames back to life. The familiar ritual felt meditative, grounding her in the present moment. She moved to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, the domesticity of the task bringing her a sense of normalcy she hadn't experienced in months. As she worked, she found herself planning their day. Perhaps a short hike in the snow, definitely sometime by the fire, maybe a trip to the nearby town she had noticed on the drive up if the weather remained clear. "Tommy!" she called again, slightly louder this time. "I'm making pancakes." Still no response. Sarah frowned slightly, then remembered how deeply 9-year-olds could sleep, especially after the excitement of a new place and the physical tiredness that came with mountain air. She climbed the wooden ladder to the loft, expecting to find Tommy buried under blankets. The loft was empty. The sleeping bag was neatly arranged, as if it had been slept in but then carefully straightened. Tommy's backpack was still there, along with his clothes and books, but there was no sign of her son. "Tommy!" Sarah called, her voice sharper now, tinged with the first edge of concern. She quickly climbed down from the loft and began searching the cabin. The bathroom was empty. The living room showed no signs of recent occupation beyond their activities from the night before. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She opened the front door and stepped onto the small porch, the cold mountain air immediately cutting through. Her pajamas. "Tommy!" she called into the wilderness. "Tommy, where are you?" The snow around the cabin was pristine, undisturbed except for their footprints from the previous evening. No small boot prints led away from the door, no indication that a child had ventured out into the morning. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Tommy had gone exploring inside the cabin and was hiding somewhere, playing an impromptu game of hide-and-seek. Maybe he had found a cozy corner and fallen back asleep. These explanations felt logical, reasonable, but they didn't calm the growing panic in her chest. She searched every room again, more thoroughly this time, calling Tommy's name with increasing urgency. She checked inside closets, under beds, behind furniture. The cabin wasn't large, and within minutes she had confirmed what her heart already knew. Tommy was not inside. Sarah forced herself to breathe deeply, to think rationally. Children wandered off sometimes, especially curious children in new environments. Tommy was intelligent and generally responsible, but he was also 9 years old, and the wilderness around the cabin might have seemed like an exciting adventure to explore. She quickly dressed in warm clothes and stepped outside, this time prepared for the cold. The snow was several inches deep, and she began walking in expanding circles around the cabin, calling Tommy's name and looking for any signs of his passage. The silence that had seemed so peaceful an hour earlier now felt oppressive, almost threatening. Her voice echoed off the surrounding mountains, but there was no response, no sound of a child's voice calling back to her. After an hour of searching, Sarah returned to the cabin, her hands shaking with cold and fear. She needed to think clearly, to consider all possibilities. Maybe Tommy had tried to find his way back to the car, thinking they were leaving early. Maybe he had seen something interesting from one of the windows and decided to investigate. But as she examined the snow around the cabin more carefully, Sarah realized that the undisturbed nature of the snowfall was deeply troubling. It had snowed lightly during the night, and any footprints from the morning would be clearly visible. The absence of any tracks suggested that Tommy had not left the cabin on foot. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the landline phone. The welcome note had mentioned she had to call for help, had to get professional searchers involved, but when she lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone. The phone was completely dead. Her cell phone, she remembered, had no signal in this remote location. She was truly cut off from the outside world, alone in the wilderness with her son missing and no way to call for help. Sarah sat heavily on the couch, fighting back tears and trying to maintain rational thought. There had to be an explanation. Tommy was a good boy, a smart boy. He wouldn't have wandered off into dangerous terrain. He wouldn't have left the cabin without telling her. But as the morning wore on and her searches yielded no results, Sarah was forced to confront the possibility that something terrible had happened. The custody battle had been ugly, filled with accusations and threats. David had been furious about the final ruling, had sworn that he wouldn't give up his fight for Tommy. Could David have somehow tracked them to this remote location? Could he have taken Tommy during the night? The thought seemed impossible. David didn't even know where they were going, and the cabin was so isolated that finding it would have required considerable effort and planning. Yet as Sarah continued to search and call for her son, she couldn't shake the feeling that Tommy's disappearance was not a simple case of a child wandering off. Everything about the situation felt wrong, unnatural, as if some external force had intervened in their peaceful retreat. By noon, Sarah had searched every accessible area around the cabin multiple times. She had called Tommy's name until her voice was hoarse, had followed every possible path through the snow-covered forest. The pristine nature of the snow continued to mock her fears. If Tommy had left the cabin, he should have left tracks. Sarah returned to the cabin for the dozenth time, her body exhausted and her mind spinning with increasingly dark possibilities. She forced herself to eat something, knowing she needed to maintain her strength, but the food tasted like ash in her mouth. As she sat at the kitchen table, Sarah noticed something she had missed earlier. On the counter, partially hidden beneath a dish towel, was a small piece of paper. She picked it up with trembling hands and read the few words written in child's handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry. I had to go." Sarah stared at the note, her mind struggling to process its meaning. The handwriting was definitely Tommy's, but the message made no sense. Had to go where? Why would he leave without explaining? Why would he apologize? The note raised more questions than it answered, and Sarah found herself analyzing every curve of every letter, searching for clues about Tommy's state of mind when he wrote it. The handwriting appeared steady, not rushed or frightened, which was somehow more disturbing than if it had shown signs of distress. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's desperation grew. She had exhausted every possibility she could think of, had searched every accessible area multiple times. Tommy had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note that explained nothing. The isolation that had felt so therapeutic the night before now felt like a prison. Sarah was trapped in the wilderness with no way to communicate with the outside world, no way to call for professional help, no way to alert authorities about her missing son. As evening approached, Sarah made a difficult decision. She would have to leave the cabin and drive until she found cell service or reached a populated area where she could get help. Every instinct screamed against leaving the place where Tommy had last been seen, but staying in the cabin was accomplishing nothing. She packed quickly, taking only essential items and leaving most of their belongings behind in case Tommy returned. She left a note on the kitchen table. "Tommy, I went to get help. Stay here if you come back. I love you, Mom." The drive down the mountain road was a nightmare of anxiety and hope. Sarah found herself stopping frequently to call Tommy's name. Into the wilderness, searching every shadow and clearing for signs of her son. The journey that had seemed pleasantly isolated the day before now felt endless and threatening. When she finally reached an area with cell service, Sarah pulled over and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's voice was professional and calm, but Sarah could barely form coherent sentences as she tried to explain the situation. "My son is missing," she managed to say. "He's 9 years old. He was with me at a cabin in Pine Ridge County, and this morning he was just gone." The dispatcher asked for details. Tommy's description when he was last seen, whether there were any signs of struggle or forced entry. Sarah answered as best she could, but the questions only highlighted how little she actually knew about what had happened. Within an hour, the first sheriff's deputy arrived at the gas station where Sarah was waiting. Deputy Martinez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a reassuring manner, but Sarah could see the concern in his expression as she described the circumstances of Tommy's disappearance. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Deputy Martinez said gently. "Are you involved in any kind of custody dispute or domestic situation that might be relevant to this case?" Sarah's heart sank as she explained the recent custody battle, David's anger about the ruling, and the threats he had made. She could see the deputy's expression change as he processed this information, his professional demeanor sharpening as he considered the implications. "I need you to think carefully," Deputy Martinez said. "Is there any way your ex-husband could have known about this trip? Any way he could have followed you or tracked your location?" Sarah shook her head, but even as she did, she found herself questioning her own certainty. David had been desperate, angry and resourceful. Could he have somehow discovered their plans? Could he have been watching them, waiting for an opportunity? As night fell, a full search and rescue operation was organized. Teams of volunteers, trained searchers, and law enforcement officers converged on the remote cabin. Sarah returned to the site with Deputy Martinez, her heart breaking as she saw the organized chaos of the search effort. The cabin was treated as a potential crime scene, with officers carefully documenting every detail. Sarah watched as strangers moved through the space that had felt so peaceful and safe just hours before, their presence somehow violating the sanctity of what should have been her and Tommy's refuge. The search continued through the night, with teams using flashlights and thermal imaging equipment to scan the surrounding wilderness. Sarah remained at the cabin, unable to leave despite the cold and exhaustion, clinging to the hope that Tommy might somehow return. As dawn broke on their second day at Pine Ridge, Sarah faced a reality she had been trying to avoid. Her son had vanished without a trace from a locked cabin in the middle of nowhere, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a mother's shattered heart. The search teams found no footprints, no signs of struggle, no evidence of where Tommy might have gone. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that this was not a case of a child wandering off into the wilderness. Deputy Martinez approached Sarah as she sat on the cabin's porch, watching the organized search effort with hollow eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently, "we need to expand our investigation. We need to look at this as a potential abduction case." Sarah nodded, though the words felt surreal. Abduction. The word belonged to news stories and television shows, not to her own life. But as she looked out at the pristine snow that had never been disturbed by her son's footprints, she knew that some force beyond nature had taken Tommy away from her. The peaceful retreat that was supposed to help them heal had become the site of her worst nightmare. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Colorado Rockies, her son was missing, and she had no idea how to find him. The investigation into Tommy Mitchell's disappearance quickly became one of the most perplexing cases in Pine Ridge County's history. Within 48 hours of the initial report, the story had captured the attention of local media, and by the end of the week, national news outlets were running segments about the vanishing at Pine Ridge Retreat. Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she never wanted, surrounded by reporters asking questions she couldn't answer and investigators pursuing theories that seemed to lead nowhere. The cabin that had promised peace and healing had become the center of a media circus, with news vans and satellite trucks lining the narrow mountain road. Detective Rebecca Walsh, a 20-year veteran of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, had been assigned to lead the case. She was a no-nonsense woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of a scene. Sarah both appreciated and feared Detective Walsh's directness. She clearly cared about finding Tommy, but she also asked the kind of probing questions that made Sarah feel like a suspect rather than a victim. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Walsh said during one of their many interviews, "I need you to walk me through every detail of your relationship with your ex-husband. Every threat, every heated exchange, every moment when you felt uncomfortable or unsafe." Sarah had recounted the story so many times that it had taken on a rehearsed quality, but she forced herself to relive each painful moment. The custody. A battle had been brutal, she explained, filled with accusations and counter-accusations that had torn apart any remaining civility between her and David. David was furious about the final ruling, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he wouldn't give up, that he'd find a way to get Tommy back, but I never imagined he would do something like this." Detective Walsh made notes as Sarah spoke, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Did your ex-husband have any knowledge of your plans to visit Pine Ridge? Any way he could have tracked your location or discovered your travel arrangements?" Sarah shook her head emphatically. "No. I booked the cabin online using my maiden name. I paid with cash. I didn't tell anyone where we were going except my sister Jennifer, and she would never." Sarah's voice trailed off as she realized how naive she sounded. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Walsh said gently, "desperate people do desperate things. If your ex-husband was determined to find you, there are ways to track someone's movements, especially if they have financial resources and connections. The suggestion that David might have been systematically tracking them was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. If David had taken Tommy, at least that meant her son was with someone who, despite their differences, wouldn't physically harm him. The alternatives were too horrible to contemplate. But as the investigation progressed, Detective Walsh's team found no evidence linking David to Tommy's disappearance. He had been at work the night Tommy vanished, with multiple witnesses confirming his presence at a late-night business meeting. His phone records showed no calls to the Pine Ridge area, and his credit card statements revealed no unexplained travel. Expenses. We've checked every angle, Detective Walsh told Sarah after a week of intensive investigation. Your ex-husband was not involved in Tommy's disappearance. We need to look at other possibilities. Sarah felt the last of her hope crumble. If David hadn't taken Tommy, then where was her son? The search and rescue teams had combed every inch of the surrounding wilderness using dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment. They had found no trace of Tommy, no evidence that he had ever left the cabin. The media attention intensified as the case took on an increasingly mysterious quality. How does a 9-year-old boy vanish from a locked cabin without leaving footprints in the snow? How does a child disappear from one of the most isolated locations in Colorado without any witnesses or evidence? Sarah found herself the subject of intense scrutiny, both from law enforcement and the media. Some news outlets suggested she might be suffering from a psychological breakdown, that Tommy's disappearance might be a manifestation of her own mental instability. Others implied that she might be involved in her son's disappearance, that the grieving mother act was a cover for something more sinister. The accusations and innuendos were devastating. Sarah had lost her son, and now she was losing her reputation, her privacy, and her dignity. She retreated to her sister Jennifer's house, unable to bear the constant presence of reporters and investigators at her own home. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah told Jennifer one evening, as they sat in the living room watching yet another news segment about the case. "Everyone thinks I'm either crazy or guilty. Nobody seems to care about actually finding Tommy." Jennifer, who had been Sarah's rock throughout the ordeal, pulled her sister close. "The truth will come out," she said firmly. "Tommy will be found. You have to keep believing that." But as weeks turned into months, Sarah's hope began to fade. The media attention gradually shifted to other stories. The search efforts were scaled back, and Tommy's disappearance became a cold case file in Detective Walsh's office. Sarah returned to work, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But everything felt hollow and meaningless. She went through the motions of daily existence, but her thoughts were consumed by questions that had no answers. Where was Tommy? Was he still alive? Was he scared? Was he wondering why his mother hadn't found him? The Pine Ridge retreat cabin sat empty, its owner unable to rent it to other families after the media attention had branded it as the site of a mysterious disappearance. Sarah sometimes drove up the mountain road, sitting in her car outside the cabin and hoping for some sign, some clue that had been overlooked by the investigators. During one of these visits, about 6 months after Tommy's disappearance, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. There were fresh tire tracks in the snow leading to the cabin, tracks that hadn't been there during her previous visit. Someone had been to the cabin recently, someone who had no official reason to be there. Sarah immediately called Detective Walsh, who arrived at the site within an hour. The tire tracks were photographed and measured, but they led nowhere. The snow around the cabin remained undisturbed, and there was no evidence that anyone had entered the building. "It could be hunters," Detective Walsh said, though her tone suggested she wasn't convinced. Or maybe someone curious about the case. We get a lot of trespassers at crime scenes. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the tire tracks were significant, that someone was watching the cabin, waiting for something. She began visiting the site more frequently, hoping to catch whoever was making these mysterious visits. The breakthrough came in early 2017, almost 6 years after Tommy's disappearance. Detective Walsh had retired, and the case had been assigned to a new investigator, Detective James Morrison. Morrison was younger than his predecessor, more willing to embrace new technologies and approaches to cold cases. "Mrs. Mitchell, Detective," Morrison said during their first meeting, "I've been reviewing your son's case, and I think we may have missed something important. I want to re-examine all the evidence using some new techniques that weren't available when the original investigation was conducted." Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time in years. Detective Morrison's enthusiasm was infectious, and his fresh perspective offered the possibility that Tommy's case might finally be solved. Morrison's team began by re-examining the physical evidence from the cabin using advanced DNA testing and forensic techniques. They also obtained satellite imagery from the time period around Tommy's disappearance, hoping to identify any vehicles or activities that might have been missed by the original investigation. The satellite images yielded the first significant new evidence in the case. Hidden in the vast database of overhead imagery was a series of photos taken during the early morning hours of Tommy's disappearance. The images showed a dark-colored vehicle approaching the cabin on a rarely used Forest Service road, a route that wouldn't have been visible to the original search teams. "This changes everything," Detective Morrison told Sarah as they examined the satellite images together. "Someone was at the cabin during the time Tommy disappeared, someone who took great care to avoid detection." Sarah stared at the grainy images, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The vehicle was too distant and the resolution too poor to identify specific details, but its presence proved that Tommy's disappearance was not a case of a child wandering off into the wilderness. "Can you track the vehicle?" Sarah asked. "Can you find out who it belongs to?" Detective Morrison's expression was grim. "We're working on it, but it's going to be difficult. The images are 6 years old and the vehicle could have been stolen or disposed of. But it's a lead, Mrs. Mitchell. It's the first real evidence we've had that someone else was involved in your son's disappearance." As the investigation progressed, Detective Morrison's team uncovered more troubling evidence. The Forest Service road used by the mysterious vehicle had been gated and locked during the time period in question, which meant that whoever had accessed it had either obtained a key or had illegally bypassed the security measures. Even more disturbing was the discovery that the road's security cameras had been disabled the night before Tommy's disappearance, and the maintenance logs showed that the gate lock had been changed just days after the incident. Someone with inside knowledge of the Forest Service's security procedures had orchestrated Tommy's disappearance. "We're dealing with someone who had significant resources and planning capabilities," Detective Morrison explained to Sarah. "This wasn't a random crime or a crime of opportunity. Someone specifically targeted you and Tommy, and they had the means and knowledge to carry out a sophisticated abduction." Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. If Tommy had been the target of a planned abduction, then the custody battle with David might have been irrelevant. Someone else had wanted her son, someone with the resources and connections to make him disappear without a trace. But who? And why Tommy? These questions haunted Sarah as the investigation continued. Detective Morrison was making progress, but each new discovery seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The case took another unexpected turn when Detective Morrison's team began investigating the ownership history of the Pine Ridge Retreat cabin. The property records revealed that the cabin had been sold just 3 months before Tommy's disappearance, transferred from a corporate entity to a private individual who had then listed it as a rental property. The timing was suspicious, and Detective Morrison's investigation into the corporate entity revealed a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The paper trail was deliberately obscured, but persistent investigation eventually led to a disturbing discovery. The corporate entity that had originally owned the cabin was connected to a law firm that had represented David Mitchell during the custody battle. The connection was indirect and carefully hidden, but it was there. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Morrison said during their next meeting, "I need to ask you some questions about your ex-husband's legal representation. Specifically, I need to know about any conversations or interactions you might have had with his attorneys or their staff." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to recall the details of the custody proceedings. The legal battle had been a blur of meetings, depositions, and court appearances. She had interacted with numerous people in David's legal team, but she couldn't remember anything that had seemed suspicious at the time. "There was a paralegal," Sarah said slowly, a memory beginning to surface. "A woman named Patricia Hendricks. She was present during most of the depositions and meetings. She seemed interested in Tommy. She asked a lot of questions about his routines, his school, his activities." Detective Morrison made notes as Sarah spoke, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Did this woman have any direct contact with Tommy? Any opportunities to interact with him or observe his behavior?" Sarah thought back to the painful months of the custody battle. She was present during one of the supervised visits with David. She said she was there to observe and document the interaction for the court, but she spent most of her time talking to Tommy, asking him about his interests and his relationship with me. The memory was unsettling in retrospect. At the time, Sarah had assumed that Patricia Hendricks was simply doing her job, gathering information for the legal proceedings. But now, with the knowledge that Tommy's disappearance had been carefully planned, her behavior seemed more sinister. Detective Morrison's investigation into Patricia Hendricks revealed that she had left her job at the law firm just days after Tommy's disappearance, claiming she was relocating to another state for personal reasons. Her forwarding address had proven to be false, and she had seemingly vanished as completely as Tommy himself. "We have a suspect," Detective Morrison told Sarah. "Patricia Hendricks had access to information about your custody case, knowledge of your personal circumstances, and the opportunity to plan Tommy's abduction. She disappeared at the same time as your son, and she's been impossible to locate." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with rage. If Patricia Hendricks had taken Tommy, then her son might still be alive, living somewhere under a false identity. The thought was both comforting and terrifying, but finding Patricia Hendricks proved to be as challenging as finding Tommy himself. The woman had covered her tracks carefully, using false identities and offshore accounts to hide her movements. Detective Morrison's team worked tirelessly to trace her activities, but she remained elusive. As 2017 drew to a close, Sarah found herself caught between hope and despair. The investigation had uncovered significant evidence about Tommy's disappearance, but her son remained missing. Patricia Hendricks was a suspect, but she was also a ghost, someone who had vanished into the shadows of the criminal underworld. The case continued to evolve, with new leads and new frustrations. Sarah clung to the hope that Tommy was still alive, that someday she would hold her son again. But as the years passed, that hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. The years between 2018 and 2023 passed in a blur of false leads, renewed hope, and crushing disappointment. Sarah had aged visibly during this time, her hair now streaked with silver, and her eyes carrying the weight of prolonged grief. She had maintained her job at the insurance company, but her colleagues noticed that she seemed to exist in a perpetual state of waiting, as if she were holding her breath for news that might never come. Detective Morrison had retired in 2020, and the case had been transferred to Detective Maria Santos, a dedicated investigator who brought fresh energy to the cold case. Santos had spent months reviewing every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every lead that had been pursued over the years. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Santos said during one of their regular meetings, "I want you to know that we haven't given up. Tommy's case remains active, and we continue to follow every possible lead." Sarah appreciated the detective's dedication, but she could see the strain in her eyes. The case had consumed multiple investigators over the years, and the lack of resolution was taking its toll on everyone involved. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way, through a phone call on a rainy Thursday morning in June 2024. Sarah was at work reviewing insurance claims when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. "Mrs. Mitchell." The voice was hesitant, nervous. "My name is Robert Chen. I think I might have information about your son." Sarah's heart stopped. Over the years, she had received dozens of calls from people claiming to have information about Tommy. Most were well-meaning but mistaken, some were cruel hoaxes, and a few were from disturbed individuals seeking attention. She had learned to temper her expectations, but she could never stop herself from hoping. "What kind of information?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I was hiking in the mountains near Pine Ridge in March 2011, Robert said. "I saw something that day, something that's been bothering me ever since. I only recently learned about your son's disappearance, and I realized what I witnessed might be connected." Sarah's hands began to shake. "What did you see?" Robert's voice was heavy with regret. "I saw a woman and a child on a trail above the cabin area. The woman was dragging the child, and he was crying, trying to get away. I thought it was just a family dispute, maybe a divorced mother dealing with a difficult kid. But the child was screaming, and the woman was rough with him." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. "Did you see their faces? Could you describe them?" The child was small, maybe 9 or 10 years old, dark hair. The woman was middle-aged, average height, wearing a dark coat. I was quite a distance away, but I could tell something wasn't right. The child was terrified. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you report this in 2011? Robert's shame was evident in his silence. "I mentioned it to a forest ranger the next day, but he discouraged me from getting involved. He said it was probably just a domestic situation, that calling the police would only make things worse for everyone. I was young and inexperienced, and I trusted his judgment. I've regretted it every day since." Detective Santos immediately launched a full investigation into Robert Chen's account. The forest ranger he had spoken to in 2011 had since retired, but Santos tracked him down and interviewed him extensively. The retired ranger, Thomas Bradley, reluctantly confirmed that Robert had approached him about the incident. "He was upset about something he'd seen," Bradley admitted. "But we get a lot of hikers who misinterpret what they observe. Family disputes, custody exchanges, kids having tantrums. I thought I was doing the right thing by discouraging him from filing a report." Bradley's decision to discourage Robert from reporting the incident had effectively buried a crucial piece of evidence for over a decade. Sarah felt a surge of anger at the cascade of failures that had allowed Tommy's abductor to escape justice, but she forced herself to focus on the present opportunity. Detective Santos worked with Robert to create a detailed timeline of his observations. The incident had occurred on the morning of Tommy's disappearance, on a trail that was accessible from the Forest Service Road, where the mysterious vehicle had been detected in the satellite imagery. This corroborates our theory about Patricia Hendricks, Detective Santos explained to Sarah. We believe she abducted Tommy from the cabin during the early morning hours, then attempted to transport him through the wilderness to avoid detection. But the new evidence raised troubling questions. If Patricia Hendricks had taken Tommy into the wilderness, what had happened to him? The search teams had combed the area extensively, finding no trace of either the child or his abductor. Detective Santos's team began a renewed search of the area where Robert had witnessed the incident. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they systematically examined every square foot of the mountainous terrain. The search was emotionally devastating for Sarah, who understood that they were now looking for evidence that Tommy might not have survived his abduction. The search continued for weeks, with volunteers from the community joining the professional investigators. Sarah spent every possible moment at the search site, unable to stay away despite the emotional toll. She needed to be there, needed to be part of the effort to find her son. On a cloudy morning in late July 2024, one of the search dogs indicated a possible location about 2 miles from where Robert had witnessed the incident. The area was densely forested and would have been easily missed during the original search efforts. Detective Santos approached Sarah with a grim expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've found something. I need to prepare you for the possibility that this might not be the outcome we were hoping for." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. After 13 years of uncertainty, she was about to learn Tommy's fate. She nodded, unable to speak, and followed Detective Santos to the search site. Investigators had uncovered a small clearing hidden deep in the forest, a place where the natural landscape had been disturbed years earlier. The area showed signs of having been used as a temporary camp, with the remains of a makeshift shelter and evidence of a fire pit. But most importantly, they had found personal items that belonged to Tommy. His backpack, water damaged, and partially buried under years of forest debris. His favorite toy, a small action figure that Sarah had given him for his 8th birthday. And wrapped in plastic, protected from the elements, his jacket. Sarah held Tommy's jacket to her chest, breathing in the faint scent that remained after all these years. The fabric was exactly as she remembered, down to the small tear in the left elbow that she had intended to mend. "We're continuing to search the area," Detective Santos said gently. "We're going to find answers, Mrs. Mitchell. We're going to find out what happened to Tommy." The search of the hidden campsite continued for several more days, with investigators meticulously documenting every piece of evidence. They found more of Tommy's belongings, including his shoes and some of his clothing. But they also found evidence of Patricia Hendricks' presence, items of women's clothing, personal hygiene products, and most disturbing of all, medical supplies that suggested someone had been injured. Detective Santos's team worked to reconstruct what had happened at the remote campsite. Based on the evidence, it appeared that Patricia Hendricks had held Tommy at the location for several days, possibly waiting for the initial search efforts to die down before moving him to a more permanent location. But something had gone wrong. The medical supplies and the hastily abandoned campsite suggested that either Tommy or Patricia had suffered an injury or medical emergency. The campsite had been abandoned quickly, with valuable items left behind in what appeared to be a panic. "We believe Patricia Hendricks was planning to transport Tommy to another location," Detective Santos explained to Sarah. "But something happened that forced her to abandon the campsite. We're working to determine what that something was." The investigation expanded to include a search of the surrounding area, with teams looking for any sign of where Patricia and Tommy might have gone after leaving the campsite. The terrain was challenging, with steep ravines and dense forest that could easily hide evidence of their passage. On the fourth day of the expanded search, a team working near a rocky outcropping made a discovery that would finally answer the questions that had haunted Sarah for 13 years. Hidden beneath a carefully constructed rock cairn, they found a notebook that had belonged to Patricia Hendricks. The notebook contained detailed planning notes for Tommy's abduction, including maps of the Pine Ridge area, information about the cabin's rental schedule, and observations about Sarah's routine and habits. But most significantly, it contained entries from the days when Patricia and Tommy had been at the hidden campsite. Detective Santos read portions of the notebook too, Sarah carefully editing out the most disturbing details. Patricia's entries revealed a woman who had become increasingly unstable and paranoid, convinced that she was being pursued by law enforcement and that her rescue of Tommy was part of a larger mission to save children from unfit parents. The final entries in the notebook painted a picture of a woman who had realized that her plan was failing. Tommy had been injured during the abduction, and Patricia lacked the medical knowledge to treat him properly. Her paranoia had grown to the point where she was afraid to seek help, convinced that any contact with the outside world would result in her capture. The last entry was dated 5 days after Tommy's disappearance. "He's getting worse. I don't know what to do. I thought I could save him, but I think I'm the one who's destroying him. God forgive me." Sarah listened to Detective Santos read the entries with a mixture of grief and rage. Patricia Hendricks had stolen her son, had put him through unimaginable terror and suffering, and had ultimately failed to keep him safe. The woman's mental illness was not an excuse for the devastation she had caused. But the notebook didn't provide the final answer about Tommy's fate. The entries stopped abruptly, and there was no indication of where Patricia and Tommy had gone after abandoning the campsite. The search teams expanded their efforts, using the notebook's information to guide their investigation. They found evidence of Patricia and Tommy's movement through the wilderness, following a trail of disturbed vegetation and abandoned items that led deeper into the mountainous terrain. The trail led to a steep ravine that would have been treacherous to navigate under the best circumstances. For a woman with an injured child, it would have been nearly impossible. The search teams found more evidence at the top of the ravine: torn clothing, bloodstains, and signs of a struggle. Detective Santos prepared Sarah for the worst as the search teams prepared to explore the ravine. The evidence suggested that Patricia and Tommy had fallen, possibly during an attempt to escape the pursuing search teams or during a moment of panic and confusion. The recovery effort in the ravine was technically challenging and emotionally devastating. After days of careful excavation, the search teams found the remains of both Patricia Hendricks and Tommy Mitchell at the bottom of the rocky gorge. Sarah's world ended and began again in the same moment. The 13-year nightmare of uncertainty was over, but the price of that knowledge was the final devastating confirmation that Tommy was gone. She held Detective Santos's hand as the detective gently explained what the evidence suggested, that Patricia and Tommy had fallen into the ravine during the night, possibly while trying to navigate the treacherous terrain in darkness. The medical examiner's report provided some comfort to Sarah, indicating that Tommy's death had been quick and that he had not suffered unnecessarily. But no amount of scientific analysis could ease the pain of knowing that her son had died scared and alone, far from the safety and love of his mother. Patricia Hendricks had left behind a more detailed confession in her personal effects, revealing the full extent of her delusions and the planned nature of Tommy's abduction. She'd become obsessed with Sarah's custody case, convinced that Tommy was being endangered by his mother's unstable lifestyle. Her theft of Tommy had been motivated by a distorted sense of rescue, a belief that she was saving him from a harmful situation. The investigation into Patricia's background revealed a woman who had been struggling with mental illness for years, someone who had used her position at the law firm to access confidential information about vulnerable families. Tommy had not been her first target, but he had been the child she had chosen to rescue. Sarah attended Patricia Hendrick's funeral, needing to see the woman who had destroyed her life laid to rest. She felt no satisfaction in Patricia's death, only a profound sadness for the mental illness that had driven her to such desperate actions. The legal aspects of the case were complex, with multiple lawsuits filed against the law firm that had employed Patricia, the Forest Service ranger who had discouraged Robert from reporting his observations, and the rental company that had failed to properly screen their property managers. But no amount of legal action could bring Tommy back or undo the years of uncertainty and grief that Sarah had endured. Tommy's funeral was held 13 years after his disappearance, a ceremony that provided closure for Sarah and the many people who had been touched by the case. The service was attended by hundreds of people, including many of the investigators, volunteers, and community members who had never stopped looking for Tommy. Sarah stood at her son's grave, finally able to say goodbye to the boy who had been frozen in time as a 9-year-old. She placed his favorite toy beside the headstone, along with a letter she had written to him every year on his birthday. "I never stopped looking for you," she whispered to the grave. "I never stopped believing that someday I would hold you again. I'm sorry it took so long to bring you home." The years of searching had changed Sarah in fundamental ways. She had learned to live with uncertainty, to find meaning in the midst of unimaginable loss, and to appreciate the preciousness of every moment with the people she loved. Tommy's disappearance had been a tragedy, but the community's response had restored her faith in human goodness. Detective Santos approached Sarah after the funeral service, her own eyes red with tears. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that Tommy's case has changed how we handle missing children investigations. The lessons we learned from this case will help us find other missing children more quickly." Sarah nodded, grateful that Tommy's tragedy might prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. She had considered establishing a foundation in Tommy's name, dedicated to improving missing children investigations and supporting families during their darkest hours. As she drove home from the cemetery, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The 13 years of searching had been the most difficult period of her life, but they had also revealed her own strength and resilience. She had survived the unthinkable and had found a way to honor Tommy's memory by helping others. The Pine Ridge retreat cabin had been demolished years earlier, its dark history making it impossible to use for its original purpose. In its place, the county had established a small memorial garden where families could come to remember loved ones who had been lost. Sarah visited the garden regularly, finding peace in the mountain setting that had once been the site of her greatest tragedy. Tommy's story had become part of the fabric of the community, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the never-ending search for justice. Sarah had found her own form of justice, not in revenge or punishment, but in the knowledge that her son's case had made the world a little safer for other children. The pain of losing Tommy would never fully disappear, but Sarah had learned to carry it as a testament to the depth of her love rather than as a burden of her failure. She had been a good mother, and Tommy had been a beloved son. Their story had ended in tragedy, but it had also demonstrated the power of love to transcend even the darkest circumstances. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she looked at the photographs of Tommy that covered her dresser. He remained 9 years old in those images, forever frozen in time with his bright smile and mischievous eyes. She touched each photograph gently, whispering a good night that she had been unable to say for 13 years. "Sleep well, my darling boy," she whispered. "Mommy loves you, and Mommy will never forget you." The mystery of Tommy's disappearance had been solved, but the love between a mother and her son would continue forever. Sarah had found her peace, and Tommy had finally come home. As you've just experienced the deeply emotional journey of Sarah Mitchell's 13-year search for her son Tommy, I want you to know that stories like this remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit and the unbreakable bonds of love that connect us all. If Sarah's story has touched your heart, if you felt the pain of her loss and the power of her perseverance, I encourage you to share this experience with others. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, because every subscription helps us continue bringing you these important stories that honor the memories of those we've lost and celebrate the courage of those who never stop searching for the truth. Your likes and comments mean everything to us. They let us know that these stories matter, that they're reaching people who care about justice, about families, and about the precious gift of human connection. Share your thoughts about Sarah's journey in the comments below. Have you ever experienced the fear of losing someone you love? How did this story affect you? Together, we can ensure that stories like Tommy's are never forgotten, and that the love between a mother and her son continues to inspire others to never give up hope, even in the darkest of times. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until next time, hold your loved ones close and remember that love never truly dies.